people mocked him. He didn't. He didn't retaliate. And then even in the past chapter when we studied it, after Saul led the people to victory, the people came to him and said, well, what are we going to do now with those people that were those people who didn't believe that you could lead us to victory? And they wanted to kill them. And Saul said, no, we're not going to kill them. Like, God is the one who saved us. When you really look at all the things that Saul did in the first years of his reign, it was very positive, very good. So at some point along the way, Saul began to change, and he began to maybe feel that all of the success that he's been having has been maybe from his own, from his own efforts, from his own cleverness, from his own power, which tends to happen sometimes when we're in a position for a long time. Usually when we start a new position, we have a lot of humility because we know we have a lot to learn. But then after some time, we begin to feel like we're know-it-alls. Like if you ever remember how you felt when you had your first job, and you go there and you feel like you're the new person that doesn't know anything, and you're just you're asking everybody questions. You're doing anything that anyone asks you to do immediately. But then if you fast forward, years later, maybe you're the one who's losing your temper at somebody else because they don't know what to do, or you begin to feel maybe that it's like you're better than other people at this, and so on. So it's important that as we progress in something, that we always remember all throughout that even though we're gaining knowledge and experience and these things, but in the end, God is still the one who is granting us success. So we see here in this chapter, this is the famous chapter that we always speak about in chapter 13, where the Saul is the one who's going to offer this unlawful sacrifice, right? We always speak about this chapter. We always speak about Saul and what he did here as being kind of like the beginning of the end for him. Everything up until this point was positive, okay? And so kind of keep that in mind when we look through this. So in verse 1 it says, Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. This first verse is very confusing, and different people have different opinions about what it means. Some people believe that there's some words missing in the original text. That's it's like been corrupted. The translation that we have, we're studying 1 Samuel 13. So it says Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel. So some people believe that you should add the word 40 before the word year, and add the word 30 before the word 2. So it would read, Saul was 40 years old when he became king and reigned 32 years over Israel. This is one.
How did they pull that? How did they pull that?
So in Acts 13, when Saint Stephen is speaking about Saul, or no, well, this is when Saint Stephen. It indicates that Saul was king for 40 years. Okay.
In Acts?
Yeah, in the book of Acts, it refers to the reign of King Saul as being 40 years long.
40.
40. Okay, 40 years. Yeah. So also, if you look at the time between when Saul died and when David became king, that was a little more than 7 years time. Okay, so if this is really saying that when it says Saul was 40 years old when he became king and reigned 32 years, well, if you take the 32 years and add to it the 7+ years, then you have about a 40-year reign. Okay, if you consider that time period in between when Saul died and when King David became king was kind of like still quote-unquote under Saul because there had been no new king yet. But there's different opinions. For instance, if you look at the NIV version, it actually has it differently. The NIV states that Saul was 30 years old and reigned 42 years instead of being 40 years old and reigning 32 years. So the point of this is that at this point in time, there's a lot of time that has passed. So if you look in chapter 9, when Saul first became king, he was young, okay? Whereas now in this chapter, we see that he has a son, Jonathan, and this son of his is a man of war. Okay, so we never heard about Jonathan before. And obviously Jonathan could not be a man of war when he was young. So Jonathan could be maybe around 20 years old, okay? And if he was a child or not even born yet when Saul was made king, then we know that there's probably about 20 years or so that have passed. Okay, so this gives us a time frame. Okay, that in the first 20 years of his reign, if he reigned 40 years, in the first 20 years of his reign, everything was fine. Okay, and again, this teaches us not to be complacent because A lot of times we start out very good, and then something changes over kind of the course of our life that maybe is going to cause us to change our ways, just like what happened with Saul. So in verse 2 it says, Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the mountains of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent away, every man to his tent. Okay, so here we're describing a battle, a war scene that's about to happen between the Israelites and the Philistines. So Israel is preparing for this battle, and they're mobilizing their army. Okay, so he has 3,000 men, and then 2,000 were with Saul, and 1,000 were with Jonathan. So they broke up into like two camps in two different cities to kind of help them plan and strategize. What is that? Yeah, for the battle. Okay, yeah. So after Saul kind of chose this setup, he was satisfied, and that's why he says he sent the rest of the people he sent away, every man to his tent. So he was kind of satisfied with that setup and the number of soldiers that they had. And Jonathan attacked the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. Then Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, Let the Hebrews hear. So the Israelites made like a preemptive attack on the Philistines that were in the city of Geba, and now Saul is like kind of announcing it all throughout the kingdom to kind of, again, like mobilize the people and say, look, we're starting this attack, and we're victorious, and so on. This city, Geba, that had been taken over, was originally an Israelite city. It had been taken over by the Philistines, and it was a priestly city. So remember, there were different cities that were set aside for the priests. Okay, and so that because the priests come from which tribe? Levi. And the tribe of Levi had no inheritance. See, like you can see this nice thing here. Here you see all the 12 tribes of Israel and see what land each one had received as an inheritance when they entered the promised land. So you notice Levi is not one of the ones there because they received no land. And instead the priestly cities were scattered all throughout the land because everybody needs the priests. So they didn't just put all the priests in one area so that the priests would be kind of blending in with everyone, being accessible to everyone. So this city, Geba, was originally a priest city. Okay, and had been taken over by the Philistines, and now they're wanting to take it back. Okay, also this city was only 3 miles away from Gibeah. Okay, Gibeah is where we just said Jonathan was. Gibeah is the original city where Saul was from. Gibeah is currently the capital of Israel. So if you imagine that, how much like tension there was at this time, that you have a city which is the capital of Israel, and only 3 miles away from it, you have this other city that had been taken over by the Philistines. Okay, which is Geba. Don't confuse the two, Gibeah and Geba. Now all Israel heard it, and said that Saul had attacked the garrison of Philistines, and that Israel had also become an abomination to the Philistines, and the people were called together to Saul at Gilgal. Then the Philistines gathered together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots, and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude, and they came up and encamped in Michmash to the east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in danger, for the people were distressed, then the people hid in caves, in thickets, in rocks, in holes, and in pits. And some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Okay, so remember, we had two camps. One camp was 2,000 people, and the other camp was 1,000 people. And now the Philistines are coming to attack them with how many people? 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people more than you can count. So of course this is like a huge number of people coming to attack them, and so rightfully the Israelites were afraid, so much so that they began to run away. Okay, they hid in caves and thickets and rocks and holes and in pits. I mean, you can imagine this scene where it's like the Israelites are so afraid that they're running for their lives. They're really scared, and they're just hiding in caves. And then some people went so far as to run completely outside of the borders of Israel completely. When they run across the land, the Jordan River on the other side. Okay, again, if you look there, you see where Gad is, the yellow on the right. Okay, it's Gad. So the Jordan River is right at the border there, on the western border of Gad. So there were some tribes that were given their inheritance on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, so they ran completely across the Jordan over to that area to get away from the battle as much as they could. Okay. If you remember last time when we had seen like there was a gathering of the people at Mizpah, and they were having like a convocation, like they were having like an assembly to pray to God and to offer burnt sacrifices in the presence of Samuel. And while that was happening, the Philistines found out about this and they came and attacked them at a time where they were the most vulnerable. If you remember that we read about this. And then what happened was is the people asked Samuel, pray for us so that the Lord will save us. And God sent thunder to confuse the Philistines. Okay, this is the last time when they faced this kind of like slaughter. They called on to God and God saved them. But now we see here that there's a different response. Instead of immediately turning to God when they're in distress, they are now running away. And we see this kind of every chapter. You see that the Israelites act in a different way. Sometimes they're very faithful and they ask God to protect them and God answers their prayer. Sometimes they're faithless. Sometimes they're disobedient. Sometimes they're, every chapter almost it seems the character of the people has changed. And it also tells us something about ourselves because throughout the seasons of our life, oftentimes our faith in God changes based on the circumstances that we're facing, and maybe our faith is truly being tested in ways that it had never been before, and we find ourselves actually struggling in ways we never have struggled before. Sometimes when people face stressful situations, they believe that they've actually changed, and they've become less faithful maybe than when they were children. Sometimes we remember when we were children and the faith that we had, and the joy we had in going to church, and the joy we had in doing different things, and we think that now as an adult, maybe that's changed. We're not that person anymore, or how we were when we were like in college or different times in our life. But actually, a lot of it is because now we have, as older people, we have a lot more stress in life than we used to have. And that stress tests us and taxes us and calls us to have more faith than maybe we ever had before. So it's not necessarily that we've lost faith. It's not necessarily that we've changed for the worse. But as life gets more stressful, as we get more responsibility, as more things are demanded of us, God is calling us to have more faith in Him. And so we begin to realize that we're weak. And that's supposed to make us turn more to God and to realize how much more we need Him. Because actually, if you think about it, as we get older, there's more and more and more burden on us that we have to cast on Him as opposed to keeping it ourselves. And if we don't learn that lesson when we're young, it's going to be much harder for us to do it when we're older. So what happened then? Okay, it says, then he waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel. So Samuel had told Saul, wait 7 days, okay, and then he was going to come and offer the burnt sacrifice before they go to battle. They identified that they wanted God's blessing in the battle, and they were going to offer this burnt sacrifice so that God would bless them. So Samuel told Saul, wait 7 days, I'm going to come and I'm going to offer the sacrifice and then go to battle. Okay. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So Saul began to see that even that small remnant of people who were actually courageous enough to stand with him in battle and not flee and run away, they themselves began to run away. Because it's like they feel like, okay, Samuel's not coming, the anticipation of the battle, they're very afraid. So Saul decided that he was going to offer the burnt offering himself. So Saul said, bring a burnt offering and peace offerings here to me, and he offered the burnt offering. Now this is not allowed by a king. Kings are not allowed to operate as priests. Okay, there is no actually priest king in the Old Testament. You think there is no one who is both a priest and a king, except for Melchizedek, the kind of figure
Jesus figure.
Yeah, so he's someone who's a very mysterious figure. We don't have information about him. He has no genealogy. We have no information where he came from. He's the only one who was a king and also a priest. And that's when we say that the priesthood of Christ is according to the order of Melchizedek, not according to the order of Levi. Melchizedek actually offered bread and wine as a sacrifice, which was unheard of. There's no other time where bread and wine is offered as a sacrifice except in the New Testament, now in the church. So we consider him to be like a symbol of the priesthood of Christ. He was the only one who was both a king and a priest. All right, the three ranks in the Old Testament were priest, king, and prophet. Okay, so you could have people who were both a priest and a prophet, like Samuel was a priest and a prophet, but he was not a king. Okay, King David, okay, he was a king and a prophet. Okay, but he wasn't a priest. But you can't have someone who is a king and a priest. Okay, a king and a priest. And there's been kings in the Old Testament that were very successful kings, and they did so many good things. But once they began to desire the priesthood, and they took the priesthood like by force, then God rejected them, okay, and they were punished. So here, God wants to make a distinction between the king and the priesthood. Because why? Because God spoke through like Samuel. Okay, so if Saul was going to take on everything on his own, then he wouldn't need Samuel anymore. And here, King Saul is not even seeking after the will of God. He's just kind of going on his own and doing something instead of waiting for Samuel, who was the one appointed by God to be his mouthpiece, that he would come and speak to the people.
Did Saul complete the 7 days wait, or did he?
We see that he waited 7 days. That's what he says. But he like literally like Samuel came just right immediately after he offered the sacrifice. So later that same day that he offered the sacrifice. Now it happened as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering. See, as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering, that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. And Samuel said, "What have you done?" Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattered from me, and when you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said, the Philistines will now come down on me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering." So what do you think about this reasoning that he gave?
I mean, he wanted to make supplication to the Lord before battle.
So that's good, right? Yeah.
I think it's just a justification. I think he knew that it was wrong, and it was him trying to justify his lack of faith. I mean, I don't know. I find it it's kind of hard to understand.
But Saul violated the rule because the king is not supposed to offer the sacrifice.
That's right. So on the one hand, yeah, go ahead.
No, nothing. It's just exactly one hand is it's okay, the other hand is it's a violation.
Yeah, on the one hand, like he's saying, okay, he identifies that God is going to be his help. So he wants to offer this offering to God so that God would be with them. So that's good. But on the other hand, he's disobeying God in doing so. Okay? So it's showing a misunderstanding. Okay? The burnt offering, just like we were talking about the Ark of the Covenant before. Okay, before when the Israelites were going into battle against the Philistines, they would take the Ark of the Covenant with them as kind of like a magic charm or some kind of source of blessing. Even though they were prohibited from doing that, the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be covered. The Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be only transported by the Levites in a certain way. It wasn't intended to be taken into battle and going like everywhere where the people are going. Okay, so it was intended to remain in the tabernacle, in the Holy of Holies. That's what it was for. Okay, but the people thought to themselves, well, we want a blessing in the battle, so we're going to bring the Ark of the Covenant, and we're going to have it with us so that we will have blessing. And God cursed them. They lost the battle. Like everything that happened to them from the Ark of the Covenant, everywhere the Ark of the Covenant went, instead of it being a blessing on the people, it was a curse to the people. Okay, because it's not about the Ark of the Covenant. It's about God who has made the Ark of the Covenant holy and who has given certain rules of how we should deal with it. Same thing here. God has set certain rules. He said, a king shall not offer sacrifice. So he's trying here, Saul, to make this supplication to God, but at the same time he's breaking the commandment of the person he's supplicating. You know, it's like kind of like a child going to his parent, and the parent has set some kind of rule. Okay, and the child breaks the rule, and he says, I'm breaking it because I care about you, or I'm breaking the rule because I love you, or I'm breaking the rule for, it's like, that's not your place to decide. It's like, I put the rule for a reason. God put this rule for a reason. It's not up to Saul to break the rule. Actually, if it had come to that point where, let's say Samuel didn't come at all, and they were forced to fight, is God not going to bless the people in the battles because they didn't offer a burnt sacrifice? He knows that they didn't have the opportunity to offer a burnt sacrifice. Okay, so sometimes here we see like people kind of contain God and think of him in a certain way that it's like a magic charm. It's a magic charm. Like, for instance, someone might come to the church and, they touch an icon and they take a blessing from the icon. Okay, but in the rest of their life, they're living a life completely unchristian in every possible way. And yet they come to the church and take a blessing from the icon. But what kind of blessing are you getting exactly? It's not magic. Like, yes, an icon is a blessing. An icon is a blessing for those people who are doing everything else that they can do. They come and take a blessing. For instance, some people treat communion like this. Some people come to the church at the very end of the liturgy, and then they want to take communion, and it's not a blessing. It's a curse. It would be a curse for you if you do this. Okay, so we have to understand that the things that we do around us, the rituals that we do, are based on a relationship with a person. They're not just rituals for the sake of ritual. They're not just empty actions that we do that somehow we've been taught are blessings. Okay? The blessing comes from the person who is offering us the means of reaching him through the ritual. Okay? He's telling us, you can reach me, you can approach me, you can supplicate me, you can pray to me, you can get a blessing from me through this. But in the end, he is the one that we're trying to reach. It's not just the ritual itself. It's not just the act itself. It's not just the burnt offering, the act of having a burnt offering. If I offer a burnt offering that disobeys the command of God, then I'm disrespecting the God that I'm seeking the blessing from. So how does that work? It's a backwards mentality. And unfortunately, as here, sometimes we do the same thing. That we have a backwards mentality. Okay, God wants our heart. So if we give him our heart through these things that we're doing, that's fine. But if we're doing these things as just kind of an empty shell, as just kind of an empty practice that we do simply because we're doing them, but our heart is far from him, we should not expect any kind of magical blessing from the things that we do. So here Saul, when he's giving this excuse of him sinning against God by offering the sacrifice, he gives 3 reasons. Okay, the first one is he says what? The people were scattered from him. Okay, it says, okay, in verse 11, he says, when I saw the people were scattered from me, that's number 1. Okay, and you did not come within the days appointed, that's number 2, so Samuel being late. And the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, so the Philistines were an imminent threat. So one thing we're going to see about Saul is that whenever he is confronted with some mistake that he made, he has many, many different excuses as to why he did it. Okay, and he never takes responsibility for what he did. This is completely the opposite of David. Okay, David, for the very first time, David was confronted with his sin and was made known and aware that what he did was so horrible, and he kind of woke up from his stupor that he was in. He immediately said, I've sinned against the Lord. Okay, but every time Samuel goes to Saul and he tells him what you've done is wrong. Okay, all Saul can say is a bunch of excuses every single time. This is the first of many times, and that's the difference between Saul and David. So really the downfall of Saul, after now 20 years of being king or more, is that he doesn't take responsibility for his actions. Okay, someone who doesn't take responsibility for their actions and doesn't own up to their actions cannot grow. Because if somebody comes and rebukes me for something, and my whole mindset is about, I want to just protect my reputation, or I don't want people, or protect my pride, I don't want people to say anything negative about me, I want to always show that in the end I'm always right, then even if there's real things that I need to change in myself, I will never change. Because I'm always just too interested in what other people think about me, and I will just give excuses. Now, maybe some of these excuses, these are realistic excuses. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, think if any one of us was in Saul's place and we were about to be annihilated by the Philistines, and we see this, this trinity of reasons, the deserting army, the Samuel's tardiness, the Philistine threat, and all this stuff is coming upon us at the same time, we were going to be very tempted to do something that we shouldn't do, okay? But now that he's been confronted with this, instead of apologizing and saying, you know what, I was under a lot of stress and I was wrong and, forgive me, instead he's just justifying what he did. So he says, therefore I felt compelled, in verse 12, and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Like that was, God wanted to establish your kingdom forever, and now it will not be established. But now your kingdom should not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. God took this idea of the king seeking the priesthood or performing a priestly function extremely seriously. There was, I think in either 1st or 2nd Kings, I don't remember which king, his name was Uzziah. And like when you read about his kingship, he did more works like building things and improving Israel and even tearing down the high places and like doing all kinds of things that are positive, like both spiritually and physically in the kingdom. And then toward the end of his life, it came into his mind that he wants the priesthood, and then he was completely destroyed. So God does not, he does not take very lightly at all like this idea of the king wanting the priesthood. Okay, it's a very distinct role, and even with all the other good things that Saul has done, like this, like he knew so well that he should not be doing this, and it should not have even been an option in his mind. But there is a severe consequence to it immediately when it happens. Saul knew very well that this was wrong. So when he says his kingdom would not continue, what does that mean? What does it mean his kingdom would not continue? I mean, what did we say about how long was he king?
40 years?
40 years. Like that's a pretty good time to be king. You're going to be king for quite some time, and actually Saul was by no means like killed or annihilated or destroyed immediately. So what does it mean when it says your kingdom would not be continued? Because he says what was the alternative? He says the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Like what does that mean, forever? How would he be king forever? How would he would have the kingdom forever?
His descendants.
His descendants would have the kingdom forever. Okay? So what's forever? How long is that?
Ever.
So how would his descendants be kings forever?
Like his descendants, then his descendants, then.
But how long is forever? Like everything has an end, right? Like the world's gonna end at some point. So what is forever?
Does he mean like the incarnation of Christ?
Yeah, so he's talking about this is the messianic prophecy. Okay? So God wanted that Saul would be among the ancestors of Christ. Okay? But because of this, he would not. And instead, who did become David? Okay, who came after him. So the thing that he lost here was not just a sense of, okay, this is my kingdom and my, because I mean, it has two meanings. I mean, one is Jonathan, his son, or any of his other sons, did not become king after him. Okay, so his lineage ended, but more than that, he would not be considered among the ancestors of the Messiah. Okay, whereas David had both now. David and his children would inherit the kingdom, but albeit with a divided kingdom, and then also he was one of the the Messiah came through his line. Then Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. Okay, so Samuel left. Like there's no indication that Samuel actually offered any kind of sacrifice at that point, because Saul offered the sacrifice. Samuel came. He was upset. What happened? He said, "You did foolishly." Saul defended himself, and then that's it. Samuel leaves. Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin, and Saul numbered the people present with him, about 600 men. Saul, Jonathan his son, and the people present with them remained in Gibeah of Benjamin, but the Philistines encamped in Michmash. Then raiders came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned on the road to Ophrah, to the land of Shual. Another company turned to the road of Beth-horon, and another company turned to the road of the border that overlooks the valley of Zeboim toward the wilderness. Okay, so they're starting their attack, the Philistines. They took this huge army of what was it again? 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and all these people, and they divided into 3 groups. So they're going to start attacking in multiple places at the same time. Now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, "Lest the Hebrews make swords or spears." So what was the situation? At that time, not only were the Philistines have so much army, but they also had higher technology than them. They had metal weaponry, because they had access to blacksmiths. Okay? And the Philistines had arranged it in such a way that they kind of like monopolized all of the blacksmith blacksmithery, I guess, including the blacksmiths themselves as far as the equipment and everything, so that the Israelites had none of that. So that means that the only thing that the Israelites could be attacking with is wooden weapons. Okay? Whereas the Philistines, they had metal weapons. So you can understand why the Israelites were so terrified, because like they're going to be slaughtered. Okay? But all the Israelites would go down to the Philistines to sharpen each man's plowshare. Even like the plowing and the farm agriculture instruments that they would use, they didn't have a way to sharpen them. They actually have to go to the Philistines to get them. His mattock, his axe, and his sickle. And the charge for a sharpening was a pim for the plowshares, the mattocks, the forks, and the axes, and to set the points of the goads. So it came about on the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and Jonathan his son. Meaning Saul and Jonathan individually had like a sword, but none of the army that they had any kind of sword, had nothing. And the garrison of the Philistines went out to the pass of Michmash. Okay. So this, like other times in the past, there seemed absolutely no hope for the Israelites. Okay. And King Saul, in this case, was not able to protect the people. Okay. And he had been now rejected by God. So it was a very low, dark time for the Israelites. And here they are now, like fleeing, hiding in caves, running away, with inferior weapons. Like everything about the situation is against them. But God has demonstrated in the past many times, and actually it's kind of ironic because, when God told them you're going to regret having a king, all the times in the past that the people faced such a situation, God came in as their king and he rescued them. God came in and he resolved the situation with some kind of miracle, did something with them. Whereas here, now it's like, okay, people are trusting in this human king, and not only is this human king not saving them, but he's actually been a source of cursing for them. He's actually been a source of actually like God abandoning them because of the sin of their king. So they're getting a very kind of real taste of why God had told them in the previous chapter that it was wrong for you to ask for a king. Okay. Any questions about that chapter? Okay. So now we're going to see something happen where Jonathan comes up with the most ridiculous kind of military plan you can imagine, and God intervenes and uses this as a means of saving the people. Okay. Now it happened one day that Jonathan the son of Saul said to the young man who bore his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Okay, so Jonathan the son of Saul and his armor bearer, two people, and he tells them, "Let's just go over to the Philistines." Okay, it's kind of like a covert assignment. And Saul was sitting in the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men. Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's father, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, was wearing an ephod, and the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. Okay, what is this describing, this scene? What is it talking about? Saul was sitting in the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree. What is the significance of a pomegranate tree? And
Jonathan did this against the will of his father. He did not tell his father.
Not against the will, but without telling his father. So it's not like his father told him, "Don't do this." He just didn't know that he was doing this.
Yeah, I mean, the language should tell me that probably his father was not aware of it. He probably doesn't agree with it.
Well, I mean, keep in mind that Jonathan and his father, first of all, are in two different cities. And it's not like they had cell phones or any way to communicate easily. So he decided on his own, because otherwise waiting like days or weeks for it to communicate something, he just decided he was going to do this. But he did it on his own, and all the other kind of military actions that they were taking were all like kind of like things with armies and a large number of people, whereas here he was going to try something different where it was just him and his armor bearer. Okay, and at this point it's still not clear yet what he wants to do. But when it's talking about Saul sitting under a pomegranate tree and this man Ahijah wearing an ephod, like what does all that mean? What is that talking about? What is this scene describing?
And relaxing.
No, I mean they're in the middle of a war, so it's not a relaxing.
He's not worried much.
No, so this was a description of his royal court. Okay, so he didn't have a castle or a palace or anything like that, right? Because, like, first of all, it's like those things maybe would come later. Right now, his kind of royal entourage. Okay, he's sitting under a pomegranate tree, so you can think of like that's his throne under a tree. There have been judges, actually, if you read in the book of Judges, Deborah, one of the judges, it said that she sat under a tree and everybody came to her to like inquire of her and like get counsel. So this is what he's sitting under this tree, okay? And he says the people with him were about 600 men. So he had 600 men in his entourage, okay, they were with him in the royal court. And then he had a priest with him in the royal, he's like the royal priest. It's the priest that serves the king. Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's father. Who's Ichabod? Do you remember Ichabod?
Yeah, I just read it, but
Hmm?
son of Phinehas.
Who's Phinehas?
He was the son of Eli, and
And
he
who's
was the bad, not the bad priest, but the priest that didn't really care. And his two sons were the wicked ones.
Right. So we read about Eli and his sons at the very beginning of the book of 1 Samuel. Okay, and Eli died when he found out that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken. Okay, and his sons also had died in the battle. Okay, and Phinehas's wife was in labor at the time when she heard about this, and she gave birth to Ichabod, the son. And if you remember the word Ichabod, the name Ichabod means like the glory of Israel has left, like it's kind of like a depressing name. Okay, so Ichabod, his brother, okay, was named Ahitub, and he had a son. His name is Ahijah. Okay? Now, all of these were in the Levitical tribe because they're all descendants of Eli, and Eli was a priest. So that means all of these descendants are also priests. Okay, so Ahijah is a priest. And when it says that he was wearing an ephod, the ephod is like the priestly garment. Okay, so when he's wearing this garment, it says the priestly garment of the priest. Between the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. And the name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Seneh. The front of one faced northward opposite Michmash, and the other southward opposite Gibeah. Then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few." So you see here, Jonathan is placing his faith in God, even though the military tactic he uses completely doesn't make any sense, and we're going to see more of that. But he just believes that somehow God is going to save. And when he says the Lord will save by many or by few, meaning he can save by a large army or he can save just by one or two people. And essentially this is what he's saying is, I believe that God can save the entire nation through what he's about to do, and that God would give him some kind of a sign of what it is that he should do. Very faithful. And you see how God is going to respond to his faith. So his armor-bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart. Go then, here I am with you, according to your heart." Okay? This phrase, according to your heart, the correct translation from it is like, I am with you just as your heart is with you. So it's like as close as your heart is to you, and it cannot leave you. I also, the armor-bearer speaking to Jonathan, I also am with you just like your heart. Okay? So that's what it means when it says, according to your heart. Then Jonathan said, "Very well, let us cross over to these men, and we will show ourselves to them." Now, see, this starts where it get weird. So, it's one thing if you wanted to go do like a covert action, where you're going to go and you're going to go secretly, you're going to do something, you're going to sabotage something, you're going to do something. But here he's saying, essentially, let's just go over, and we're just going to go and show ourselves to them. Remember, this is a humongous army. Okay? So he's giving up the element of surprise. And at the same time, he has really no weapons that can stand up against them, and he has no real plan. He has no resources to do anything. And all he has is his faith in God, and he's essentially going like on a suicide mission. There's nothing that he can do to do anything from a rational kind of human perspective. If they say thus to us, "Wait until we come to you." Okay, so when he and his armor bearer are spotted by the Philistines, he's saying, if they say to us, "Wait until we come to you," then we will stand still in our place and not go up to them. So they're like on a higher elevation, like up some rocks. And he's going to stand down here and they're going to see him. And if they say to him, "Wait until we come to you," then they're just going to stay. They're not going to do anything. But if they say thus, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign to us. So he's like placed in his mind that if they say that come up to us, then this will be a sign from God that God is going to deliver them into their hands. Okay. So again, this is kind of a ridiculous plan. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden. Because remember, the Philistines knew that the Israelites had run and they were hiding in caves. It says, look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden. Then the men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, come up to us and we will show you something. Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel. Okay, so now they're climbing up like these rocks, like going up to them. And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor-bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan. And as he came after him, his armor-bearer killed them. So Jonathan and his armor-bearer, when they got up to the top, they actually were able to overpower them and kill them, okay, who were there. That first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made, was about 20 men. Within about half an acre of land. So there were perhaps like some people there at the garrison and some other people scattered around, and they went around to each of the kind of the people there and they killed the people that they found. Now look at this part in verse 15. And there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and the raiders also trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it was a very great trembling. Okay, so the people, the Philistines, when they saw that this happened, they didn't realize that it was just two people that went and did this. They thought this was like some kind of like major attack from Israel, and that Israel really was powerful, and they didn't realize it, and the people had come back from the hiding in the caves, and they're like about to attack them. Again, they don't have like spy satellites. They can't tell really what's going on. They just see like something that happened, and so they begin to be afraid. Okay, it sounds a lot like the story of Gideon. Okay, when God told Gideon to only go with 300 people into battle to fight the Midianites, and then God put a dream in the minds of some of the Midianites to make them afraid that when they heard that Gideon was coming to attack them, even though they only had 300 people, that they were so afraid that they left. Okay, so it's the same idea. Like God is the one who's working. There's no human action here. The only human action that there is faith. And this is what God wants us to do. Like in so many situations that are beyond our control in the world, like we keep trying to find a way to control things we cannot control. But the one thing that we can control is to have faith in God. And when God sees that we have this kind of faith, like Jonathan had, that he will do amazing things. He will respond. He was not going to look at our faith and say, this foolish person who's, thinks that he can go and defeat these people. He actually went and defeated them simply because of the faith of Jonathan. And if Jonathan hadn't thought to himself that he was going to have this faith and do this, then the outcome could have been very different. Now the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and there was the multitude melting away, and they went here and there. So he's like watching now a scene unfold where like all these people, this army of the Philistines, now like they were running and they were confused. Then Saul said to the people who were with him, now call the roll and see who has gone from us. And when they had called the roll, surprisingly Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. So Saul understood that someone from the Israelites must have gone over there for something like this to have happened. And so they began to call out the names of everybody to find out who was missing, and they found out that Jonathan and the armor-bearer were missing. And Saul said to Ahijah, okay, now pay attention to this is important. And then Saul said to Ahijah, remember who's Ahijah?
Who's the ephod guy?
The priest, okay, the priest wearing the ephod. He said, bring the ark of God here, for at that time the ark of God was with the children of Israel. Now it happened while Saul talked to the priest that the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Okay, so what is this? So in the Old Testament, when people wanted to inquire of God, they would go to the priest. And the priest had different means by which they can inquire. One of the ways that was used is the ephod had on it these two things. One of them was called the Urim, and one of them was called the Thummim. Have you heard of these before? The Urim and the Thummim? Okay, so essentially they would ask God a question. Okay, and then something would happen to one of these things that one would mean yes and the other would mean no. Okay, so that's one of the means by which God communicated with the people. So here Saul is bringing the priest and the Ark of the Covenant. It's not clear what the Ark of the Covenant was really used for here, but again, it was in the context of an inquiry to God. So they're making an inquiry to God. They have the priest, they have the Ark of the Covenant, and they're asking God, what should we do? Okay, should we go and attack? Should we not attack? So while the priest was there, and they were in the process of asking God what to do, Saul saw that the confusion among the people was increasing. Okay? And so he said to the priest, okay, withdraw your hand, meaning, okay, don't continue. We don't have time for this. We're just going to go and attack. Okay? Again, very foolish. I mean, Saul again is taking things into his own hands. Exactly the same attitude that he had when he offered the sacrifice prematurely. Because he thought to himself, okay, I need to do something now. I can't wait because I don't have time to wait and I have to go. So here, same thing with when he's asking the priest to withdraw his hand. He's in the process of asking God, and then he thought to himself, no, I don't have time to listen to God. I don't have time to hear the will of God. I have to act now. Okay? And this is something, again, oftentimes we fall into this. We feel like there's some urgent situation, something that is stressing us, something that requires an answer quickly. And instead of taking the time to ask God, to seek God's will, to wait and pray and kind of find peace in the right decision, maybe sometimes we act hastily and we just go and we do what it is that we think is best. Okay. There's actually no precedent in the Bible where this has ever happened before, where there was any kind of like ceremonial, like a spiritual ritual that was being done, like prayer that's being done, supplication that's being made to God, that was interrupted like this. Then Saul and all the people who were with him assembled, and they went to the battle. And indeed every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was a great confusion. Okay, what does that mean? When he said every man's sword was against his neighbor, who's he referring to here?
Israelites.
No, the Israelites are... No, he's going to the battle, right?
Wait, him and his... Wait, he said only Jonathan and Saul had swords, right?
Right. But what I'm saying, I mean, the other people might have had like wooden swords or wooden... But what I'm saying is, right now it says what... They went into the battle. Who are they fighting? They're fighting the Philistines, okay? So they go and they find the Philistines are attacking one another. And why was this too? Because part of the thing that had happened throughout this time is some of the Israelites defected to the Philistines. Okay, because they felt like they were going to be killed. So some of the Israelites actually went and joined with the Philistines. Okay? And they might have had on like Philistine armor and this stuff, and they were fighting with them. Okay? And then when this happened, okay, they realized that now Israel has a chance to succeed. They didn't feel anymore like they had to continue kind of betraying their people. And so from the perspective of Saul, it's like they're fighting one another. Okay, even though they could have been Hebrews. Actually, it says it in the next verse. Moreover, the Hebrews who were with the Philistines before that time, who went up with them into the camp from the surrounding country, they also joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Right, so there was a group of Hebrews that had betrayed Israel, and they were with the Philistines, probably to save their lives, because they felt like they were going to be killed if they remained with the Hebrews. And so at that point in time, those Hebrews changed allegiances, and they went back with Israel, and they were already mixed in with the Philistines, so they just are starting attacking them. Okay. Likewise, all the men of Israel who had hidden in the mountains of Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, they also followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle shifted to Beth-aven. So all the people that had fled all over the place, that went and hid in the caves and the pits and all this stuff, when they realized that Israel now had a good chance of winning, they also gained courage and they went and attacked and to help with the battle. Okay? So if you look at what is it that man did in this story and what is it that God did, Okay, so we know that the people, one, they escaped from the battle. They deserted. They went and hid in caves. They went and crossed the Jordan River and ran to like other nations. Okay, some of them actually joined the enemy. Okay, because they were afraid of what might happen to them. Jonathan, in his plan, all he did was he went up and presented himself to the Philistines. Okay, there was no real plan. There was no real like military strategy. There was nothing that he did except he went there all by himself and his armor bearer. Also, we see that Saul, like instead of seeking the will of God, interrupted a prayer so that he could go and fight without waiting to hear what God wanted him to do. And yet, without the plan and without coordination, without military strategy, and without obedience, even like from Saul, in the end, God granted them success. So when you look at this and many other times where God grants success to the people, it's not because we deserve it. It's not because we're good. It's not because we have good plans. It's simply because God is loving. And we see how God responded to the faith of Jonathan. And because Jonathan knew that it was only God that could save them. It wasn't his father Saul. It wasn't their military might. It wasn't anything. It wasn't the fact that their swords were inferior to the Philistine swords. But in the end, like Jonathan had faith and God delivered the people. So really, you could say yes. I mean, God was the one who saved, but Jonathan was the man of faith that kind of worked together with God for this to happen. It wasn't Saul the king. And the men of Israel were distressed that day. Okay, now here's something else that Saul does. The men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had placed the people under oath, saying, "Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening, before I have taken vengeance on my enemies." So none of the people tasted food. Okay, so Saul, in a kind of, now he feels like, okay, we're winning, we're chasing the Philistines away, we're driving them back. And so he wanted to somehow like give some kind of a motivation to the people to make them take this vow. He wanted like commitment from the people. So he says, okay, no one is going to eat anything, okay, until what? Until evening, before I have taken vengeance, okay, on my enemies. So meaning no one is going to take a break, everyone's going to keep fighting. This is a commitment, this is a vow that he's making the people to take. But there was a problem with this because, I mean, the people were going to get hungry and the soldiers need food to fight. Okay. Now all the people of the land came to a forest, and there was honey on the ground. And when the people had come into the woods, there was honey dripping, but no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath. Therefore he stretched out the end of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it in the honeycomb, and put his hand on his mouth, and his countenance brightened. Countenance brightened meaning like he was invigorated because of the food, like he was faint before, and now he's not faint anymore. Then one of the people said, "Your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, 'Cursed is the man who eats food this day.' And the people were faint. But Jonathan said, 'My father has troubled the land. Look now, how my countenance has brightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies, which they found. For now would there not have been a much greater slaughter among the Philistines?' Now they had driven back the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon, so the people were very faint." So in the end, the people were successful, but they were very tired and faint, and there was no need for this kind of oath that the people would take that didn't have any purpose. And the people rushed on the spoil. So now what happened is, now that they had destroyed their enemies, they had driven away their enemies, the people are so hungry, they like want to go and eat anything they can find. Okay, so the people rushed on the spoil and took sheep, oxen, and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Okay, now this was a problem because it was commanded the people in the Torah not to eat anything with the blood. Okay, they were not allowed to eat the blood. So when the people ran and ate the animals still with the blood, this was actually, again, against the command of God. Then they told Saul, saying, "Look, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood." So he said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a large stone to me this day." So what he said is to bring a stone, like a big rock, and he could have it there with the people, so that when people wanted to eat the animals, they would actually take the animals first, put them on the stone so that the blood would drip off of the animal onto the ground and be drained of the blood, so then they could eat it. Okay?
And eating raw meat.
It's not clear. I mean, it kind of implies that it's raw, but yeah, could be raw. I mean, they were maybe very hungry. Then Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, bring me here every man's ox and every man's sheep. Slaughter them here and eat, and do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood." So every one of the people brought his ox with him that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. This was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Now Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them." And they said, "Do whatever seems good to you." Then the priest said, "Let us draw near to God here." So Saul asked counsel of God, "Shall I go down to the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. So you see, previously, when he was asking God and he didn't wait for God to answer, and he went and fought on his own, now he's coming again asking God in the same way. Could be asking through the priest with the Urim and the Thummim, okay? And God did not answer. He did not give an answer at all, okay? And Saul said, "Come over here, all you chiefs of the people, and know and see what this sin was today." So Saul assumed that the reason that God is not responding is because someone sinned in the camp. Okay, someone sinned against God. Okay, if you remember the other story, when the people first came into the promised land, and Joshua was the leader of the people, and they went to try to take a city. It's called Ai, A-I. Okay, and they lost. Okay, and then the people said, or Joshua said, it's because of a sin that somebody committed in the camp. And they found, sure enough, that there was a person in the camp, his name was Achan, who had taken like an accursed object as a spoil of war, and he kept it in his tent. Okay, and that was the reason, is because someone stole this object that God had told them, do not take any of the spoil. And that's why the people were cursed. So here also, Saul is assuming that the reason that God is not responding to him is because somebody in the camp committed some kind of a sin, and that God is angry with them. Okay, so he has a plan now. Okay, Saul is going to figure out who is it who sinned.
Even though all of them ate, like before he got the stone, that they ate them raw with the blood, or maybe ate them with the blood, all the animals.
Yeah,
Like
he's considering that there's some unique sin that somebody did that's causing God not to respond. Okay. So he says what? Saul said, "Cast lots between my son Jonathan and me." Or sorry, no. For the verse 39. "For the Lord lives, who saves Israel. Though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But not a man among all the people answered him." So Saul is suspecting that the person who sinned is Jonathan. So he's saying, even if I find that Jonathan, my son, is the one who sinned, he will die. I'm not going to spare him, even though he is my son. Then he said to all Israel, okay, "You be on one side, and my son Jonathan and I will be on the other side." And the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." Therefore Saul said to the Lord God of Israel, "Give a perfect lot." So Saul and Jonathan were taken, but the people escaped. So what does that mean? So essentially, the way the Urim and the Thummim worked is because you have to phrase everything in terms of a yes and no answer. Okay? So Saul said, Saul and Jonathan are going to be in one group. Okay? And the people, all the nation, everyone else in the nation is going to be another group, and then they're going to ask God, okay, which one is it? Or who, is it the people? Yes or no? Okay? And so using the Urim and the Thummim, God would respond. Okay? So God said, no, it's not the people. So that means the only two people left it could be is either Saul or Jonathan, because they were the only two people in the other group. Okay? So now he's going to do one more lot, okay, to ask God which one is it. Is it Saul or is it Jonathan? And Saul said, "Cast lots between my son Jonathan and me." So Jonathan was taken. So God said, "It's Jonathan. Jonathan is the one you're looking for." Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." And Jonathan told him and said, "I only tasted a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand. So now I must die." Okay, so Jonathan is saying that to his father. And Jonathan is criticizing his father for what he did, because this was not a right oath. Saul answered, God do so and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan. Now look at this kind of, first of all, Jonathan is his son. Second of all, Jonathan is the one who saved the people through the faith that he has. Okay. Thirdly, the oath that Saul asked the people to take was nonsense. It was a very foolish oath that he asked them to take. And now, despite all these things, Saul is so set on the fact that somebody disobeyed his oath that he's going to kill his own son over it. Okay? But then look what happens. It says, but the people said to Saul, shall Jonathan die, who has accomplished this great deliverance in Israel? Certainly not. As the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Okay, so the people were enough to influence the situation so that Saul did not kill his son, all because he ate of the honey. You see, like Saul's like things are not connecting. Like things are not working right in his brain. Like he doesn't have the right set of priorities. He doesn't understand. He's beginning to see the vengeful Saul, the Saul that begins to become angry even at the people who care about him, who serve him. Like for instance, later on when he begins to lose his mind, and King David comes and he plays on the harp for him to be calm and at ease. Okay. And then later, Saul tries to kill David, even though David didn't do anything against Saul. So you see, he's becoming to be kind of vengeful, irrational. Then Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. So Saul established his sovereignty over Israel and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the people of Ammon, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he harassed them. Okay, so he's now like emboldened. He's fighting all the enemies of Israel that are around on every side, on every border. And he gathered an army and attacked the Amalekites and delivered Israel from the hands of those who plundered them. The sons of Saul were Jonathan, Jeshua, and Malchishua. And the names of his two daughters were these, the name of the firstborn Merab, and the name of the younger Michal. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, and the daughter of Ahimaaz. And the name of the commander of his army was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner was the father of Abner. And Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. Now there was a fierce war with the Philistines all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any strong man or any violent man, he took him for himself. So it's just describing kind of the works of Saul here at the end, but we're going to see soon in the upcoming chapters how Saul has now been rejected by God, and now a new king is going to arise, who is King David.
What's the significance of talking about his family and his part?
I mean, it's talking about his royal house, because this is like the royal family and the officers that he has placed in charge of like the kingdom in terms of the commander of the army.
Right here?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure specifically why here, but I think probably related to the fact that he's doing all of these exploits, like all of the attacks he's making on his enemies and things like that. A lot of times names in the Bible are included to corroborate it in history. Like, for instance, some of these names, you can find extra biblical sources that also mention the same names. And that gives us kind of confidence that this is authentic, All the genealogies, like when you have an entire chapter of genealogy, it's for corroboration. You can see, okay, these names actually are mentioned in other sources. So we can verify that this really is a historical event.
Yeah, but I mean, I think usually you see the lineage like in the beginning of the story. This is just right in the middle of the story.
I don't know. I can't say. Yeah.
No, why did God allow, like, he chose Jonathan when, like, Saul was asking, like, is it Jonathan or is it Saul? But Jonathan was the faithful one.
So, I mean, God indicated, so what Jonathan did, so the king's word, whenever the king is going to tell the people to make, he made a commandment. Okay, he said, this is what should happen. And Jonathan disobeyed the commandment. Okay? It doesn't mean that it was a sin. It doesn't mean that it's something that deserves punishment. But as the king can tell the people to do whatever pleases him, and they have to follow him. This is why in the beginning, God told the people, you don't want to have a king. Because the king is going to tell you to do a bunch of stuff you don't want to do. Okay? And as a human being, he's fallible. So if he tells you, commands you to do something that is actually to your own detriment, something that is going to destroy you, you're still required and obligated to do it because he's the king. So here, King Saul says something very foolish, and yet now the people are required to do it. So as the king, his word is binding, and anyone who disobeys him, it's disobedience. So that's why in the end Jonathan was selected. But that doesn't mean that Jonathan should be killed as a result. It was like an indication saying this is the person who did not do according to the command of the king.
But in verse 27, but Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath. So Jonathan really didn't know about it when he had that money. So really, Saul was completely irrational.
So he didn't know, but even after he did know, he didn't. He didn't comply with it, and he actually told the other people not to do it either. I mean, he was against it. Okay, and that actually tells us something again. Like sometimes we maybe on paper we do what we should do, but our heart isn't against it. And true obedience is not just like an exterior kind of like mask of I'm doing what you're asking, but inside I'm like really angry and I'm not accepting it and so on. But real obedience is placing my will submissive to the will of another, to identify that my will is not as important as the will of those people who are in authority over me. So like we sometimes spend so much time focusing on what is the right decision. Okay, and what is the right decision is gonna change based on who you are, based on your perspective, based on your experience. What is the right decision? And the reason there's rebellions that happen is because people believe that they know what is right, and that the people who are in authority over them do not know what is right. And so we spend so much time arguing about what is right. Okay, it's not so much about what is right. It's more about peace. It's about submission to authority to maintain the peace. So when someone in authority over me asks me to do something, let's say like at work or whatever, and to me it's just irrational and doesn't make sense and all this stuff. It's like, well, it's not my job to do what's right. It's my job to do what I'm asked to do. Okay? If I'm in a position of authority and whatever I have authority over, then yeah, it's my job to do what I believe is right. But if I'm in a position of obedience to someone else, it's not my job to do what is right. Now, when I say what is right, I don't mean something immoral, like I'm going to do something immoral. But in terms of what is right, meaning what is best, it's not my job. I have not been given that to do what is best. All I've been given to is to obey and follow those people above me who have the role of determining what is best. And so that's why conflicts happen many times in like when it's a relationship between an authority figure and someone who is under them. Because if the person under them believes it's up to him to determine what is right, then yeah, obviously he's going to clash with the person above him because no two people are going to always agree on what is right. So that's not my job. Okay? And so that's important for us to remember.
And if the decision was wrong, the boss is the one who's going to take it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the one who decided.
Yeah. Okay. And glory be to God forever.